Hey everybody, welcome back. So full disclosure, I wasn't going to have a video ready for today, but after the breaking news we just heard, I knew I had to put something out there. So about a month ago, we had a video on this channel where we were using the election results from the 2020 election as our prior distribution, and updating that prior distribution using the most recent polling data with the overall goal of predicting what is going to happen in this upcoming November presidential election. Now, since then, I had been reading all of the very cool comments you had left in those videos. I had been doing my own research on how to make that methodology better and better, with the hopes of the next video being an even more accurate prediction of this upcoming election. But a ton has happened since then, some of which people knew was coming, a lot of which people did not know was coming. We had the fallout from that first debate. We had the very, very unfortunate assassination attempt on former President Trump. We had the Republican National Convention where Trump named his new running mate, J.D. Vance. We also had the biggest news of all, which is going to affect our methodology, which is that President Joe Biden just dropped out of the race and has endorsed Kamala Harris as the new nominee. Now, this story is going to continue to unfold, and as I'm recording this around 1 p.m. Pacific time on Sunday, by the time many of you watch this, the story is going to have gone even further and we're going to learn even more new things. That's the way this cycle seems to be going. But I wanted to make this video because a lot of the assumptions we made in the previous video, and the key assumptions we were going to use to underpin all of the predictions we were going to make up until election day, have gone out the window. The way people voted in the last election and also the most recent polling data have become far, far less predictive of what's going to happen in this upcoming election than they would have been just a couple of weeks ago. For one thing, looking at how people voted in the 2020 election, the reason that was going to be so predictive, or as predictive as we thought it was going to be, is because it was the literal same two candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We had those in 2020, we were going to have those in 2024, so there was a good reason to believe that the way you voted, the person you voted for last time might be the same person you voted for before, and that could be a good prior distribution. That is no longer true. We're not going to have those same two nominees running, so there's a lot less reason to believe that that's going to be as informative as a prior on which to extend upon. The other thing too we used was polling data in order to update that prior into a posterior distribution. That is also kind of out the window right now. For one, we don't even know for sure who the Democratic nominee is going to be. It seems like it's going to be Kamala Harris, but enough has been going very differently than people thought in this election cycle to where I can't say that with absolute certainty at this moment in time. But even if it was, it would take the polls some time to calibrate. And even if the polls were perfectly calibrated, or if they reach a perfectly calibrated point, this is such an unprecedented thing to happen, switching out the candidate of a major party just 3 months before the general election, that I have a lot less reason to believe that the way people indicate they're going to vote on the polls will line up as well with how they actually go vote on election day, versus a couple weeks ago when they had the same two candidates and we had more faith that what people said they were going to do based on the polls is what they actually go and do on election day. So all that story is to say that a lot of the assumptions we made for that methodology have gone out the window, and so we need to adjust. And so this video is going to be, what is our methodology going to be going forward in order to make predictions of the next presidential election in just 3 months? And so here's what we're going to do in a nutshell. We're not going to abandon our previous methodology. And also, we're not going to be deterred by the new uncertainty of this situation. Rather, we're going to embrace the uncertainty of this situation, both in this current moment, and I'm sure this uncertainty will follow us all the way up until election day. We're going to take that increased uncertainty and incorporate it, bake it into the model that we had already built. The story is going to go a little bit like this. We're going to introduce a new parameter called sigma. Sigma is going to be the minimum amount of uncertainty in the probability that either candidate is going to win. That sigma is going to start at a relatively high value as soon as we find out for sure who the Democratic nominee is going to be. And it's going to go down and down and down over time to its lowest value right before election day, but crucially, it's not going to be near zero at election day. So let me say a little bit more about this sigma with some real examples. Sigma, as soon as we find out who the nominee is going to be, let's say, set at 5%. This means that the minimum amount of uncertainty we have at the moment we find out who the nominee is going to be 5%. We know within a plus or minus 5% margin of error for each state which candidate is going to end up getting all the electoral votes from that state. And we set it at this pretty high 5%. 5% seems like a small number until you put it in the context of presidential politics, which are won on razor-thin margins many times, and 5% becomes this massive margin of error, which is exactly what we're going for at the time the nominee is announced, because We don't know anything. We have very little certainty on what's going on. So there's going to be a 5% uncertainty on the probability that either candidate is going to win. So to put that into real terms, if we say that Donald Trump gets 52% of the vote in some state, then that has to have a 5% or more margin of error on it. And that puts it well within the will he win, will he not win, if you do that 52% plus or minus 5%. And the same thing for whoever the Democratic nominee ends up being. And now crucially, at that moment when we find out who the nominee is, we're going to have the highest margin of error. Over time, and hopefully I'm projecting a graph on this side of the screen here, over time, that margin of error is going to go down and down and down and down, and we're going to say that on election day, or rather right before election day, we're going to say that margin of error is 1%. Still relatively high by election standards, but it is getting lower. And the reason for that is that as time goes on, people have had more acceptance in who the nominee is, maybe the polls have calibrated a little bit better, and so that margin of error, that minimum margin of error we have and are going to enforce is going to go down and down and down, but still not hit zero. Still have a reasonable amount of uncertainty because we do live in this unprecedented time where the nominee of a major party was swapped out very last minute. And so folks, our new methodology is going to go like this, a very simple 3-step process, an extension from the methodology we already had. Step 1, based on how many days it is until election day, we're going to read the graph that I'm showing on the screen here and figure out what the minimum uncertainty is going to be, call that sigma t. Now step 2 is going to be the same thing we did in the previous methodology where we assign some kind of level of trust to the polling data, and this is based on your personal level of trust in polling data, but I would assume that this level of trust should go higher and higher and higher as time goes on because we get closer and closer and closer to the actual election day. And now step 3 is just combining steps 1 and 2. We're going to take the minimum amount of uncertainty from step 1. We're going to take the level of trust in the polling data. And by the way, 1 minus that will be the level of trust we place in the predictive power of the results of the last election affecting the results of this election. And that'll let us set up a posterior beta distribution just like we did with the previous methodology for each state. It's just that that posterior beta distribution is now going to be enforced to have the level of uncertainty that we specify in step 1. The mean of this posterior beta distribution is going to be defined by step 2, which is updating the prior election 2020 data along with the polling data that we have in that current moment. So the beauty of this methodology is that it's a simple extension from the previous methodology, but it just accepts the fact that the uncertainty is going to be higher at this point. It bakes that into our methodology, which means that at the end of the day, when we run thousands and thousands of simulations for each state using these posterior beta distributions, and then for each simulation we sum up the electoral votes gotten by Donald Trump and whoever the Democratic nominee is going to be, we'll be able to make a prediction on who will win the election, by how many electoral votes, and what our margin of error or uncertainty is about that prediction. The next video in the series will release right after we find out for sure who the Democratic nominee is going to be. I'm sure there'll be a poll either before that or right after that, and we'll use that polling data, we'll use the results of the previous election as our prior, and also we'll set the uncertainty at that 5% level, the minimum uncertainty at that 5% level, and we'll be giving a prediction at that point. So that's the plan, folks. We're going to update it as we go, as we learn new things. If even more things change in this very wild election that we're already having, please do leave comments below, because up until we had this last-minute change out of the Democratic nominee, I was actually looking at the comments from the previous video, and I was ready to incorporate those into our next methodology, and I would do the same thing here. If you have any interesting ideas or thoughts or comments, please do leave them below, and I do read those all, and we'll incorporate those into the next methodology if they make sense. Like and subscribe for more videos just like this. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see all of you next time.